so excited about this. Thank you all for registering and joining us. This is the first of 4 conversations around domestic violence and its impact on families and communities. I feel really lucky and thankful to have Saray and Michelle providing connections and support to families in Somerset and Kennebec County. So Saray Hooten is an advocate at the Family Violence Project, the local domestic violence resource center serving Kennebec and Somerset Counties. She is currently working as the Child Protective Services Liaison for Kennebec and Somerset Counties. And Michelle LeClaire has been an advocate for the Family Violence Project for 7 years, and she's currently working as the community educator. So I am recording this just so everyone knows, so it will be available for folks to watch if they were unable to join us. I will be watching the chat, so if folks have questions, they can share those questions in the chat option. We have decided to stick around for an additional 15 minutes at the end, just in case folks have questions and if they can join us. So thank you all. Again, if you want to join us for one of the next 3 or all, please register again and we will send you out the link for those conversations.
All right, before we get started today, just wanting to remind everyone that talking about domestic violence can be very emotion-inducing. We know that 1 in 4 women or 1 in 7 men are survivors of domestic violence. We may have survivors with us today, or you may know somebody that's a survivor. So please take care of yourself, practice really good self-care. Family Violence Project is here with our 24-hour helpline to always help process emotions if you feel that you need that support.
Awesome, thank you. So we're going to start in, so this is a conversation we're going to be having, but I feel like initially we might be talking a lot, but there are going to be times for discussion because we know this works best when we all are talking about it together. We're really happy that you all joined us because this is a conversation that we really need to have as a community. Keeping all of this in the darkness does not serve anyone. So thank you so much for coming and joining us. And so today we'll be covering the foundations, you know, the information of what is domestic violence. And then in the future ones, we'll take a deeper dive of how it affects families and how to support families. So what is domestic abuse? This is, you know, a time where I want to ask you what words come to mind. You can shout them out or you can put them in the chat box. I know with multiple people, you know, I think we have about 20 people on right now, so it makes it a little harder, but what are the words that come to mind when you think of domestic abuse or domestic violence?
Someone looks like said power.
Yeah.
Seclusion.
Power, seclusion.
I can see that.
Violence. Yeah. All those words. Control. Yeah. All of those things. Threats. Yeah. Thank you all. And so lots of those big words that we see of, you know, power, control, seclusion, emotional and physical abuse. Yep. So when we talk about it as a pattern of coercive and controlling behavior. It is many things. It's not just an isolated incident. It's not just one thing that happens. It's many, many things over time. We often think about it as like a frog in a pot of boiling water, because if, you know, you put a frog in boiling water, it's going to say, you know, this is danger, I need to get out. But with domestic abuse, you know, you put that frog in a pot of lukewarm water where it's comfortable and you slowly turn the heat up, it's not going to sense that danger. You know, it acclimates to it, it gets used to it. And when we look at the power and control wheel, we see all the different ways that, you know, the things happen and work together to keep that person trapped. You know, we see it in the context of a relationship. You know, we most often see it as in an intimate partnership, so a husband or a wife, but we also see it in other ways. So in a household member, it could be housemates, roommates. If it's a family member, you know, an adult child living with their parent, and it could go either way, or siblings living together, or a caregiver relationship. So if people are sharing a dwelling, you know, that could be domestic abuse. And we serve all of those people. And it's a chosen behavior, chosen by the perpetrator. We like to talk about this. It's so important to understand, because people might say, oh, it's an anger issue. Oh, it's because of drugs or alcohol. But knowing that it is deeper than that. It's a choice that someone's making. When people say, oh, they just lost their temper, you know, people get angry all the time, right? That's a normal emotion that people have, but how you choose to express that anger is different. And, you know, they may do this without even raising their voice. So they don't, you know, like, so anger is a choice, you know, it's something that everyone has, but how you express that is a choice. You know, maybe they're in a rage, what someone would call a rage. And then as soon as that doorbell rings and it's a police officer, you know, it's like a switch is flipped where they're like, oh, hello, how can I help you, officer? You know, very calm, very cool, you know, and they aren't, you know, showing this anger with their boss, with their coworkers, with the grocery clerk. You know, it's a chosen behavior behind closed doors. You know, they do this, it instills fear and denies the victim their personal liberty. So freedom of movement, freedom of choice, freedom of who they can associate with or see, freedom, you know, to pursue their own happiness. You know, these things, I think instilling the fear, seeing that piece is really important, because that is a big part of it also. And the person who's using violence believes that they are entitled to this position of power. They believe that it is their right to do this to their partner, or to this person living in their home. And it could be from, you know, this slide shows many reasons that people could believe this, but regardless of what that is, they believe it's their right to do this. And remembering that this affects, you know, all people. It doesn't matter how much money you have, what social group you're in, what your education level is, what religion, race, gender, sexual orientation. You know, this affects people across all lines. And so I also always want people to know that we serve, you know, everyone. And, you know, the people who are using violence are often men. You know, we see the statistics like Saray gave in the beginning of 82% of violence is violence against women, but we know that anyone can be experiencing violence at the hands of a partner of any gender. So we are here for everyone. And I also want to make a note about language. You know, some of the language that says perpetrators, I like to use the word, you know, people who use violence, because I think when we say perpetrators, we think of like the swamp monster that comes out and does this, but we know that people who use violence are people in our neighborhood. You know, they're leaders in our community. They could be anyone. So remembering that, you know, they're people just like also survivors. We use the language survivors, law enforcement and the criminal justice system use the word victim, but people often just want to be called by their name. So, you know, when you're speaking with someone, don't necessarily assume that they want to be identified as a victim or even a survivor. You know, they're a person who's experiencing abuse. For this presentation, we'll probably use the language of survivor often, but know that that's a personal choice that people have. And so this is a tool that people may have seen. It's one of the handouts that we sent out, is the power and control wheel. I don't know if everyone has seen this before. It was created, you know, in the 70s and 80s when the movement was first getting started, because people identified their partner having all the same behaviors. You know, they were able to map them and they were all like, they must be, you know, we must be married to the same person because this was happening. And time after time, it has been a tool that really validates for people what their experience is, to see it all on paper. So if this is your first time looking at it, or if not, like, what are the things that you see in this? Is there anything that surprises you when you look at this power and control wheel? I'll give a moment. Like sometimes when it's people's first time seeing it, it's, I don't know, it's very powerful to see all the behaviors right here.
Michelle, this is Melinda. I don't have my video on because I have food in front of me. I don't want people to have to see
okay.
my lunch. But one thing that really strikes me about this is when one of my best friends was going through domestic violence with her husband. She would call me on the phone so upset, talking about so many of these things. And I would say, it's time to call someone. It's time to get some help. And she would say, well, he doesn't hit me. He's never touched me. And I think so often people feel like things like economic abuse or isolation are not really abuse, and that it could be much worse. And I think it's really important for people to see, I hope that something like this is validating to people that these things are abuse.
Yeah, thank you, Melinda. That's a big part of it too, right? Because physical and sexual violence, they're on the edges. They are not the focal point of this. There's all these other things that happen that are abusive tactics, behaviors that people do that may not look like abuse to someone. They may not identify it because, like you said, they didn't hit me. So that's why this wheel can be really powerful. And often, a lot of the things on here, how many of them are illegal? That's a big part too, because not a lot are illegal. Of course, the physical and sexual violence and some of, the coercion or threats, but most of it is not illegal. So people might say, well, it's not violence, they didn't do this, it's not domestic abuse because they didn't do this. But so many pieces, they look different to people, or they feel different, or they're able to talk their way out of them because everything's not always bad. It's not like they do this every day. It's often, time can go by where everything's great. So people, it's not all bad. So it makes it really easy to excuse away these things sometimes because it's the person you love and trust. And so that's where some of the gaslighting can come in. When someone is, telling you, oh, it's not that bad, you did this too, minimizing their behavior. I want to make a point about isolation because, we live in Maine, where it's very rural. We are already isolated by geography, and add in, like, I think of winter in Maine being so isolating, and adding in COVID now, the ways that isolation happens. So if your partner on top of that is keeping you from seeing your family or friends, and knowing it might not be outright like you can't see this person, it might be like starting a fight before your mother's birthday party. So you have to stay home and resolve that with your partner instead of going to see your family. Did someone have a comment they wanted to make? So, it looks like all of these different things, they may not have to raise their voice, they may not have to do other things, but they are still able to control someone in these ways. And, we're going to talk a lot about kids. I think about using children as being a big part of this too, saying, if you leave, I'm going to keep the children, you'll never see them again. Or, okay, you can leave, but we have 4 kids, you can take 2 of them. How do people make that choice? It's really so much more complex than, what we think of it. So, I really challenge you to open your mind about what abuse can look like, because it can look all these ways that we don't see. Yeah.
I noticed too, using intimidation, it says abusing pets under that. And I also think I often hear and see partners who are violent using pets. So they might not hurt the pets, but they say, if you go, I'll kill the dog. If you, nobody else will take the dog. And I've known women who have stayed for their pets.
Absolutely, because that is their baby. For a lot of people, their pets are their babies, and they don't want to see harm. And we see that happening a lot more than I think people talk about. So it's very challenging. And someone put in the chat about how people can normalize these behaviors, and that's part of isolation too. If you aren't able to touch it, have your friends as a touchstone to help ground you, to say, like, this is really weird, like, I don't know what's happening. If you're isolated from them, you don't have that touchstone anymore. And then I just want to note, in the hands of an abuser, anything can be a weapon. So they know what's important to you, what you care about, what you're insecure about, so they're able to use that against you. And then different tactics being used against older adults, or people in the Q+ community, or people who are differently abled. It can look so many different ways. And I also want to mention, this power and control wheel, we see this as that coercive, controlling violence that is domestic violence. Sometimes people get arrested for domestic violence when they're using resistive or reactive violence, which is in response to the violence that they're experiencing. So that could be self-defense. Maybe they're fighting back against their partner who's using physical violence, or maybe something has happened so many times that they're going to try to put a stop to it first and hit their partner, and then they're the ones that are arrested. So we work really hard to try to, work with law enforcement to do a predominant aggressor training and identification when they're on the scene. But sometimes, it doesn't happen. People who are experiencing violence often are trying to cover for the violence. They just want their partner to stop using violence. They don't want them, taken away or sent to jail. They just want the violence to stop. So it doesn't always come out. And so people do get arrested for domestic abuse when they're using those, resistive or reactive violence. And then someone else wrote, among the immigrant community, we've seen the perpetrator withholding passports, naturalization process. Absolutely. That is so hard because it is, especially in this political climate too, it is so scary to be from another country just because of the, the forces that are there, the feelings that people have, and those documents are so expensive. So being able to withhold those and threaten deportation, those are huge threats for folks. So we are going to watch a movie real quick, and then we'll do a movie. I say a movie, a video that we've created. It used to be a role play that we would do in person, but now in the age of Zoom, we're going to, we made one so that people could watch it, and then we'll discuss it afterwards.
The following depicts typical examples of the things a survivor of domestic abuse may hear from her friends, family, and community, and the way she might think or feel in response to those messages. It does not show what she would say out loud. Rather, it reflects what her internal process may be. You will also hear the voice of her abusive partner, representing how that voice is always in her head as she processes the messages from the people in her life.
Minister, I'm glad you came to see me about this. Do you have any idea why he hit you? Is he having a hard time at work?
I feel foolish for coming here. I mean, he has been under so much stress lately. I really need to be more prayerful and patient. Things will work out. Maybe this is God's way of showing me how selfish I've been.
Please forgive me. I shouldn't have done that, but you know how hard I've been working. I could use some support around here. We made a promise to God. Are you just going to walk away from that?
Doctor, sleep troubles and anxiety often go hand in hand. We can try medications. I would also recommend you see a counselor. The good news is I don't think there is anything medically wrong with you.
Medications, so tempting. But I have maintained my sobriety for 6 years in spite of everything, and I have to stay alert for the kids. I just don't know.
Called a counselor today and made an appointment. Maybe we should go together. I know I need a little help. We both know that you do. Why don't you take those pills the doctor said would help you?
Friends, I just don't understand why you stay with him.
Sometimes I don't understand why I stay with him. I mean, some days he's the sweet man I married, and then other days he's just in his rages. But it doesn't happen all the time, and he is a really good dad. I just wish he would get some help and remember how much I love him.
What have you been doing all day? Pouring your heart out to Edna again? If it's so tough to live with me, get out. But remember, you brought nothing into this marriage, and you will take nothing away. Spread lies about me and see what it gets you.
School social worker. Your son's teachers say his behavior is disruptive, and he has not been passing in his assignments on time. I'd like to meet with you and his dad to talk about what we can do.
She has no idea how much worse things are going to be if that happens. If his dad finds out that he's acting up at school, there's going to be hell to pay. I have got to figure out how to help Jimmy with his homework more. It's just so hard to figure that out with my work schedule.
All you think about is yourself. You pay more attention to your coworkers than you do to our children. So which one of the guys are you sleeping with these days? Or is it one of your girlfriends? That would explain a lot.
Nurse, who did this to you?
What's she going to do if I tell her? I can't spend hours and hours here. What if she calls the police or something? I can't do that. The kids are so scared. I have to get home to them. He only let me come here because I think my arm is broken. I just need her to get me an x-ray and let me go home.
You're my wife. What happens in our house is our business. You are lucky I'm a patient man. Don't you go getting me in trouble. I'll lose my job.
Co-worker, did you hear about that domestic violence homicide? The newspaper said there had been a lot of police calls to the house. I would never let someone treat me that way. Would you?
That poor woman. That poor woman. I am so scared. I heard about her this morning because he read the paper. He folded it so that the story about her was right on the top. He laid the paper in front of me, kissed me goodbye, told me he'd see me after work. No one else would understand why that was so frightening. I don't know what to do.
Go ahead, leave. I'll find you where you go.
Her dad, I told you he was no good. If he ever lays a hand on you again, I'll kill him.
Oh, I wish my father had not found out. I've tried so hard to keep them from knowing. But you watch. My father will do something foolish, and then he'll be the one who ends up going to jail after everything Jack has done to me.
Why is your father hanging around here all the time? What have you been saying about me? Are you ever going to grow up and deal with your problems yourself? Or are you always going to go running home to daddy?
Police officer. When your neighbor called, she was really concerned about you. We are too. What happened here tonight?
Where is he? Is he going to find out what I say? What's safe for me to say? I don't know how to explain it. I just know that it was so scary. And I'm not sure what's safe to say.
You didn't call the police, did you? Because you hit me first, remember? We are moving out of this neighborhood. Everybody is in our business.
Therapist. Thank you for telling me all about your husband's arrest last week. That couldn't have been easy for you to talk about. Have you thought about staying in a shelter for a while?
Taking my kids to a shelter. It has really come to this. This is nuts. I have no idea what's going to become of us. I don't know how long we'll be there. I have no idea. I went to college. I've worked my whole life. But here I am, scared for my life, broke, walking away from everything, and no idea what comes next. I have got to get out of here.
Where are you? The house is so empty. You know I can't live without you and the kids. I called your therapist today to see if she knew anything about where you went. I can tell she thinks you're as crazy as I do. Plus, she sounds hot. I might try to pay her a visit myself one of these days.
His mom. How can you drag this through the courts? He'll lose his job. You know he loves you. He needs your support.
His mom. And I know who's getting dragged through the courts, and somehow it doesn't feel like him. I know what this is going to be. I'm going to be up there on the stand, and he's going to be there with his minister and his mother and his father and his boss who bailed him out. Thank you very much. Nobody's going to believe a word I have to say. I begged them to drop these charges. I just want him to leave me alone.
No one will believe you. No one else will ever love you. If you testify against me, you will regret it.
Kids. Mom, I want to go home. I miss my kitten and my bedroom. I don't want to go to a new school.
This is breaking my heart. Kids are so sad. Their whole world has been turned upside down, and I'm a wreck. I don't even know if the kitten is still there, really. Jack was so angry when he found out we left. He just trashed the house.
You leave, I'm going to report you for being an unfit mother. You're going to lose the kids. I'll have custody. I'm going to tell them you're using. I know what you've been doing with your prescription. Hey, Rose, have you had a drink lately?
Child protective worker. Have you called the Domestic Violence Resource Center about getting a protective order? We need to be sure that you can keep your children safe.
Child protective? What are people saying about me? My God, I would never hurt my kids. I would never hurt my kids. Whatever they want. They can't take my kids from me. What am I going to do?
Are you trying to get me fired? There I am at work. A sheriff's deputy comes in and serves me with a protection from abuse order. Don't worry. I'll make sure the state knows all about your long list of psychiatric meds and how you don't always take them. They won't let you keep my kids for long.
Judge. The children will visit their father every other weekend.
How am I going to let that happen? What is he going to do to them? Oh, I've always been there. When he's drunk, when he's angry, when he's scary, I've always been there to protect them. But I know if he'll do these things to me, what's he going to do to them when I'm not around?
Well, it's about time somebody saw my side of things. You heard what the judge said, and believe me, every other weekend is not enough. You'll be hearing from my attorney.
Dad said you're bipolar and off your meds. That's why he can't come home.
I wish it were that simple. This is breaking my heart. He's always loved to diagnose me, but now he's passing his judgments on to the kids. I can't imagine telling them the real reason that their dad can't come home. I have no idea what they remember. I have no idea. I hope they've forgotten everything, because good for them. But I hope they forgive me someday for turning their lives upside down.
I really miss you, honey. I hear from the kids that you're working really hard. You know you have a home with me, always. I love you. I miss my family. I need you with me.
Sister, he called me crying and real upset. He said he couldn't live without you. You've got to go see him.
I really do. I really do need to talk to him. The first time I left, I remember I went home. It was before the kids were born, and I went home in the middle of the day, thought he'd be at work. But when I got home, he wasn't at work. He pulled all the blinds. I didn't even know he had a gun, but there he was, sitting in the living room. If I hadn't come home when I did, he would have killed himself then. And he struggled with depression his whole life. I don't know. I can't let him do this to himself. What would I tell the kids? I've got to talk to him. I've got to talk to him.
You'll never get away from me. I'll find you wherever you go.
Defense attorney. Isn't it true that you invited him in that night?
Yeah, absolutely. It had been months. It took us 3 months in that shelter before we finally found a place that we could live, the kids and I. And I had done everything. I had filed to keep my address confidential. I had done everything. I don't know how he found us. But there we were. The doorbell rings. The kids get so excited. Mom, it's Dad. It's Dad. Can we see him just for a minute? And so I didn't want to disappoint them. I know I should have called the police, but I thought just for a few minutes. So I let him in. And the next thing I knew, the police were there. He had strangled me.
You just have to push my buttons. I just wanted to see my kids, but you had to get in my face, didn't you? You are such a frigid, vengeful, unforgiving dyke. I'm not paying quote-unquote child support for kids I hardly ever see just so you can screw some new guy while I'm working my butt off.
Judge, guilty of domestic violence assault, 30 days, all suspended, 1 year's probation, including completion of a batterer intervention program.
All right, everyone. So please take a deep breath. I know every time I watch that skit, it brings up a lot of feelings and it can be really impactful. And so what I want to do in the next 10 or 15 minutes or so that we have together is kind of process through what we just saw in that skit and wanting to open it up really with this question of, what stood out to you? And you can either speak or you can put it in the chat box, whatever you're more comfortable with. But really, I'm curious, just kind of opening it up to what stood out to you after watching that.
I would just share, Saray, that Michelle and I have had an opportunity to act this video out in front of a live audience at a couple of different forums, and it's very powerful and it's very impactful doing it that way. So and every time I see it, I'm struck by how powerful the message is and how realistic it is from my experience working with survivors.
Mike, what do you think the message is that skit is trying to get across?
Well, I think there's a whole lot of systemic issues that work against survivors from getting help, especially when it comes to the criminal justice system. One of the things we always talk about with survivors is, the system is geared to protect the rights of the accused or the rights of the abusers. And unfortunately, a lot of times the rights of the survivors or victims of crime kind of get pushed aside. And I don't want to say it's almost like they're forgotten about, but in some ways, it seems like the focus is more on, the abuser and getting the abuser help and providing services for the abuser than it is for helping the survivor to heal.
Absolutely. And in the chat box, I think Melinda kind of is seconding what you're saying there, this idea that we put a great burden onto the survivor and expecting them to make these changes in their life. She was asked to go to a shelter. She was asked to get a protection order. They had to move. And then in the meantime, sometimes either the abuser is being asked to complete services such as like a batterers intervention program, or sometimes, depending on the circumstance, they can kind of avoid, maybe child protective or the PFA getting served to them. And they kind of sometimes are in the background a little bit more, where mom or survivor is in the forefront and being asked to participate in all of these services. When it comes to all the different parts of this, so we saw like from the law enforcement side, we saw child protective, we saw family, the religious community. What stood out to people about all of these different supports that were supposed to be in place here? What stood out?
Hi, this is Sophie. I don't know if this directly addresses your question, but what really stands out for me is that mom was already putting resources in place for her. She was seeing a therapist, she had that safe place to talk. Yes, she had a diagnosis, but she was taking medication. And all of that, depending on how it's being turned on the table, can actually work against you when what we're actually trying to do is to have victims reach out and do these things as of self-care. And then all of a sudden they're documented and they're being turned on the table against you, while it should be a strength and a protection. And I think that is just very scary to think about, because that's one that really enforces the whole stigma of why services are being given, to people, and why people are hesitant to reach out for help.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for bringing that up. In the chat box here too, Vicky, also, I think in kind of companion with that comment is the idea that these supports sometimes are either forgetting or not realizing that there's a lot of other supports in place as well. And so everyone in, this training today is a community provider. We are reaching out directly with families, we are helping. And so if there's something to take away from that conversation, I think it's the fact that as a provider, we are hoping to help and not bombard, not make things more stressful, not asking questions about, why are you staying? Nancy in the chat box said that when somebody asks a survivor, why are you staying in this situation? It really can speak to that lack of understanding of how complex of an issue this is. I think something else that's really important to look at in talking about the providers is that none of those providers at any point asked mom, what do you feel you need moving forward? And I think if there's any question to ask, a survivor or a mom or whoever you're working with, if there's any one question to ask, it's really sitting down and just saying, what do you feel you need right now? How can I, as a provider or a support, be helping you make decisions around your life? Because it kind of felt sometimes in those conversations that providers were trying to enforce what they thought was going to be best for the mom and the kids in this situation. Somebody also says here, they also didn't seem to ask the kids or help the kids deal with the trauma. So absolutely, yeah, we heard from the kids in that skit about how they wanted to go home, how this had been a really big upset in their life, and we don't know how old the kids were, but if they were really young, they might not understand what's going on. If they're older, maybe they have had conversations with mom about why we had to leave, why you had to leave your school and your friends. But for kiddos that are really young, it can be hard to have these conversations at an age appropriate level in a way that makes it easy for them to understand. So definitely as providers, wanting to make sure not only is mom getting the support that she needs, but also are the kids getting the support that they need, because they are experiencing this and they are living through this just as much as mom is. Mom might be doing all she can in her power to be protecting the kids. Something that I noticed when mom was at the hospital talking to the nurse, she was saying, I just need to get back home. I just need to get back home. I need to make sure the kids are all right. They're alone with him. And that to me stood out as like a protective factor almost, this idea that she was even potentially having a broken arm and probably in a lot of pain. Her main focus was getting back to the kids. So they are still living this just as much as mom is, even if she's trying her best to maybe keep them away from it, or get them out of the house when violence is happening. They're still experiencing it, and they're definitely still being affected. So as providers, we definitely want to be asking what we can do for them as well. What are some other reactions that we had here, or anything else that stood out?
Sorry, I think, and I typed it in the chat. I think about like how, I think we talked about services for mom, and I love that skit because I think it just portrays like this really challenging place. And so how as community providers do we, when the kids who are involved, right, are attending school, and this is for a further conversation, like one of our other sessions, but just to sort of plant the seed of what might we see as behaviors that kids are coming to school with because they are impacted by domestic violence in their home. And as providers, how can we support kids' resilience? And I think someone else mentioned it earlier about, ACEs and the impact. Yes.
Yeah, I saw that comment as well. Absolutely. ACEs play a big factor into that. So wanting to make sure that we stick to our time here, just to kind of summarize things, the point of watching this skit is to evoke kind of that emotional response, to really get you, in her shoes per se, into the mindset of all of these really mixed feelings. She fell in love with her partner for a reason. That person that she loves is still somewhere there, and she's hoping that that person comes back, and that tug of war with feelings of, heart versus head. She said that he's a good dad, but he's not a good partner necessarily sometimes. So balancing that and trying to figure out what that means for her kids moving forward. There was so many just mixed feelings, and that's really what that was supposed to be getting through, is that this is so complicated, this is so complex, nothing's black or white, everything's gray, everything's messy. So, again, everybody here is a provider, and when working with families, keeping in mind that the best thing that we can do is just sit down and say, hey, what do you need right now? What do you need from me? What can I connect you to? Do you just need to talk? Can I listen? And then again, asking about what the kids need as well, and helping make sure that the kids are just as much taken care of. So thank you for everybody's comments. I see that more comments are coming in here, but thank you for your participation in that. And Michelle, you can take it over. You're muted, Michelle.
I was muted. How many times has that happened? So we're gonna take a look at that bigger question too, because of staying or leaving, because I heard it come up a few times. It's a natural response. We view safety as leaving, that we see that as the key as people. And so this activity, the way a colleague of ours, Regina, introduces it, is you're being inducted into a club, because that question, why don't they just leave? It's a natural response, but we're gonna break that down here. So we're gonna look at the risks that people face, whether they stay or leave. So what are the risks someone might face when staying with a partner who is abusive? So go ahead and shout them out or put them in the chat box. Maybe Kristen can relay from the chat box. What are the risks that people face when they stay with an abusive partner?
Continued abuse.
Yep. What else?
Death.
Death, yep. It's definitely a possibility. What else?
The separation or division of family.
Mm-hmm. Maybe isolation.
Addiction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Lowered
Coping.
self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
Loss of children.
Mm-hmm.
Exasperation of mental health symptoms.
Yeah. Yeah, mental health, it is really affected by this ongoing abuse. I think of exhaustion, trying to stay 5 steps ahead of your abusive partner all day, every day. In your house, I feel like your home is supposed to be your sanctuary. And when you are on your toes all the time, and then that, like, the bodily harm of the physical stress, so like physical illness, I don't know if people have worked with folks who just have these chronic illnesses and they're finding, that constant stress that people are experiencing really affects the body. Anything else? Yep.
Turning other people against them.
Yeah, that's part of that isolation that happens, right? Because people might say, give them an ultimatum, like, if you stay with this person, I'm out of here, or different things can happen. Any other things to put on the list?
My thought is the fear that the abuse is going to travel from myself to my children, where that abuse is going. It may not be now. It might just be yelling, but is that going to shift?
Yeah. Yeah.
Someone wrote.
I'm also. Oh, go
acceptance. Ahead. Acceptance.
Like acceptance of the abuse, like for the kids. Is that? I don't know if I'm.
Yes, I think just accepting that this is how it's going to be, and and this is just what I'm choosing.
This is just my life. Yeah. And I'm also going to put suicide on here because people may not see that there's a way out, and that is the easiest thing to do. So that is also a risk. So that is a pretty expansive list. So now let's look at the risks of when people are leaving. What risks do people face? Do you think after people leave, they still face continued abuse?
Yes, but I would think financial hardship.
Oh, and that's one we didn't have on this side. Yeah, so let's put that here. And you're saying that one, does that translate over to, like, if they're...
I would say it would translate over because now the parent is sole responsible. And if they were in the home and not working outside of the home, there's going to be some significant consequences.
Someone wrote, there are many instances when the abuser loses control of the victim and moves on to abusing the children after the survivor leaves. So a continued way of controlling the abuser through the children.
So that risk is still there even after they leave.
Yeah.
And it sounds like even maybe increased because they left.
Right.
Do you think?
And then death, someone put death.
Okay.
It's also really easy for children to still be used against the survivor. So they might not directly abuse the children, but for example, I know someone who her ex will, she'll ask, could you please have the daughter call me each night when she's at your house for her visits? And he'll say, if you give me something that I want. So he uses her connection with the child against her, even though, it's still a way he can control her, even though they're not together.
Right. Yeah. And that happens a lot. We see that so often. So I'm just going to do a spoiler alert. All of these things, still happen after people leave that abusive partner. All of these things are still struggles, and sometimes even more so. So I just want to do a really big arrow of all of these things, translate over, because we know that, so what has leaving done to the risks that this person faced while staying? It continues to change them. Yeah, and it makes them even more dangerous sometimes. We know that 75% of the homicides that happen when people are about to leave or have just left their abusive partner. So we know, especially for death, that risk is very much increased upon leaving. And thinking of the other risks that people have, maybe now they don't have anywhere to live and now they're homeless, and the risks that come with being homeless. There are so many other risks that happen upon people leaving. And when we talk about it like this too, we are acting like the person staying is at the root of the problem, not the abuser's behavior being the root of the problem. So it's really really important to clarify that too, because we also, you know, it's not their fault this is happening because they're there. It is the abuser's choice to do this, whether they're there or not. You know, we hear from people after they've left, they are constantly looking over their shoulder, very scared of what's happening. Now when their kids have visits, they don't know what's happening to their kids, or when they get them back, maybe they haven't been fed and they're not bathed and, you know, very overwhelmed when they get them back, so they aren't able to be there to protect them. So we hear from people all the time, you know, it was just easier to be in that relationship because at least they could protect the kids. You know, we talk about staying or leaving like it's this easy thing, like leaving an abuser would be like leaving an apartment, you know, this very easy thing, but in reality it is very difficult. You know, as someone who uses domestic abuse, who believes they have this right, you know, they seek to maintain control over their partner and child, whether they're with them or not. And so having that legal bond of having children really provides a framework for that ongoing abuse, like someone mentioned. You know, it really, really changes that. And rarely do abusive people disappear, or, you know, so knowing that that is part of that person's view of like trying to make the right decision for them and for their kids. And also, when we tell people that they should leave, it's also replicating that relationship of that abusive partner, saying, I know what's best for you and you can't make this decision clearly. So knowing that when we say that, even though it's not intentional, you know, we just want that person to be safe, it really does duplicate that relationship. You know, think of, you know, when you've been helped in the past, was it helpful for someone to tell you what to do? Probably not. So knowing, you know, like Saray said, looking at those things of, you know, how can we support you? And, you know, we often talk about safety planning, and, you know, we as a sorry, I'm switching gears here for the background. You know, we can support people with safety planning. There are things that you can support people with too. We can send you brochures, but part of that, you know, could be giving them our number, asking them what they need to feel safe. You know, just being patient with someone. I know you think in your heart they need to leave, but they are the ones that get to make that choice. And by supporting people and making that choice for themselves, you know, you are being a true ally to them. You know, listening to them and validating their experience, being able to voice concern for their safety. One of the things in that power and control wheel is threatening suicide. If you leave me, I'm going to kill myself. That is a real thing that happens so often, and it really increases the danger level. So when, you know, if you hear something like that, you know, say, I'm really worried for your safety, you know, that really concerns me. So, you know, being able to support them and how can I help you be safe? You know, here's this number to Family Violence Project. We can call them together. You know, being non-judgmental and asking them what they need for support, and also supporting yourself. You know, you can call us too and ask for support, because this is really hard. It's challenging when people are experiencing this. Your heart breaks for them. It can feel very helpless. So knowing that advocates are on the helpline for you as well to process and see how you can, you know, help them. And I'm going to hand it over to Saray for the last couple pieces of information.
All right. All right, thank you. So like Michelle was saying, specifically for Family Violence Project in the Somerset and Kennebec County area, we have the 24-hour helpline that you can call at any time, either for yourself for support or in trying to help plan to support somebody that you're working with. Family Violence Project does have 2 emergency shelters, one in Kennebec and one in Somerset County, that we have available to people that need, you know, emergency situation, last resort. Shelters are there for them. We have courts that, we have court advocates that go into the Skowhegan, Waterville, and Augusta courts to help with protection orders and offer support in that. Sometimes they can offer guidance or kind of brainstorming for family matters. They're not attorneys, so they can't give necessarily legal advice, but they can help people fill out paperwork. And we all know that court paperwork is super long and confusing, especially if you're not used to reading that kind of language. So they're there for that. Then there's my position, the Child Protective Liaison. So if you're working with somebody that has Child Protective involved, due specifically because of domestic violence, I'm a resource, and my contact information is at the end of this presentation that you can get a hold of and connect me with them. We offer one-on-one advocacy, more so pre-COVID. We're hopefully getting back there soon after. Right now, all of our office locations are closed, unfortunately. But we have community educators that are going into school systems and community projects such as like something like this, and they are educating our children, and they're educating groups of people around what domestic violence is, how it's impactful, and kind of that idea of what can be done before it happens. The education providers there go in as little as kindergarten age children, and we're doing hands are not for hitting, hands are for hugging, things like that, all the way up through into high school and college years around consent and safe relationships. We do have supportive housing services for people that are coming through our shelter. We have a housing navigator that helps connect people to housing vouchers and getting them set up and having creating stability. And then we do have a certified batterers intervention program, also known as men's work in this area, that are for identified batterers, usually after there's been an arrest, but they can be referred from other places as well. So if you're not in the Kennebec or Somerset areas, there are other domestic violence resource centers, or DVRCs, throughout the state of Maine. There are 8 that cover all the counties. This MCEDV map shows where they're located and what counties they cover. So if you're not in the Somerset or Kennebec area, you can be directed here to which DVRC would be best for you. I always highly encourage that you call your local DVRC to find out what they offer specifically. You're going to see a lot of similarities, but some DVRCs have slightly different services. Like I know Next Step, for example, in Hancock and Washington County, they have like attorneys on staff, whereas Family Violence Project doesn't have that. So there can sometimes be slight discrepancies. So always really encourage you to call your local DVRC and have a conversation with the advocate. They all do have 24-hour helplines that are available.
Any questions? I'll leave this up for information for a moment, but if anyone has any questions that they want to pose, I know we are just at 1 o'clock, so if people need to leave, feel free, and thank you so much for joining us. But if people want to stay and ask questions, we are available.